Howdy. Have you ever wondered why Apostle Paul is often so bold, why he's never afraid? Honestly, it's because of his testimony. It's because of what he experienced in the presence of God and what God brought him through. That's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the Zeal House. My name is Paul. I was saved about a decade ago. I was living wickedly for myself, and now God has miraculously changed my life, and I love to share what he has done. Although more than my own life, more than the things I know, I love his word, and I love to talk about that the most. So that's what you'll find here on this channel. Like and subscribe. Verse 10, Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, Apostle Paul is continuing his reasoning. He started off with the intro, then he comes bat out of hell, breaks down the door saying, if anyone disagrees with me, go to hell, okay? His reasoning was pretty much the Judaizers were saying Apostle Paul and his apostleship is not real. We shouldn't really take him seriously. He's not really valid. And so his response was, and their reasoning as well, one of their arguments potentially could have been, Apostle Paul wants an easy message. He wants an easy gospel. He wants something where you don't actually have to bust out the scissors. You don't have to bust out the scissors for circumcision. And he's like, oh, okay, bet. You think I'm afraid of people? You think I want people's approval? You think that I'm doing this just for a popularity concept? Let me double down. If you think that I'm afraid, you're not trying to fully, maybe the Judaizers probably weren't even fully trying to discredit Paul. They were just trying to say, hey, he's kind of a people pleaser. He doesn't want you to know the full extent of the faith, which includes circumcision and the law. And Apostle Paul said, oh, you're trying to lightly discredit me? Go to hell. I'm not trying to lightly discredit you. I'm going to try to fully discredit you. That I'm going to double down on this message, okay? Verse 10, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. That is such a powerful verse. That is something that is just, if I could make any verse in my life that I could just wish I could repeat over and over again, it's to stop seeking the approval of man in everything we do and seek the approval of God instead. Am I now trying to win the approvals of human beings or of God? He's trying to say, okay, now that I've told you to go to hell if anyone preaches a different message, does it still sound like I'm trying to be a people pleaser in my message? Because that's pretty harsh. That's going to turn some ears away. And he's acknowledging that in this verse. Am I trying to please people when I say, hey, if you disagree with me, go to hell? No, it doesn't sound like I'm a people pleaser. If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. So he's not preaching saved by faith alone because it's easy. He's preaching saved by faith alone, and not because he's trying to please people. He's trying to preach saved by faith alone because he's trying to be a servant of Christ, is what he's saying. That should be a gauge for everything you do in your life. Am I seeking the approval of man or am I seeking the approval of God? And that really is, if you dig down deep into the roots, that is ultimately the opposite ends of for or anti-religion. Super for religion or anti-religion. Why? Because religion is living by these rules. And when you live by these rules, people look at you and think, oh, wow, you're pleasing. I'm pleasing to people. I have the respect of people because I have followed all the steps of my religion. And then when you fail your religion, why are you so ashamed? Because you're ashamed of what other people will think. When you come to God through the gospel, you pass all of that. And God, you know that God looks at you in light of the gospel and that you're fully righteous as God by faith alone. You can now, every time you fail, instead of wallowing in the shame, and instead of, and then every time you succeed, instead of wallowing in the pride or splashing around in the pride, you don't think. That's not even in your playing field. That's not even in the frame. And then the same exact thing about when you're living in the world and you're living for the pride of your own life, you think, oh, look at how they're looking at me. And then when you fail and cancel culture hits, you think, oh, look how they're looking at me. And Apostle Paul is saying both of these are going to destroy you. To seek the pleasure of man is not the way to go. It's to seek the approval of Christ and to be a servant of him. I love Jonathan Edwards. He had 70 resolutions. I think he wrote when he was in his 20s, and one of them is just so burly. It's like I feel like if there was a cup of testosterone and you could drink it, it's this quote that Jonathan Edwards had. He said, "If the whole world denies God, I shall not." Like, that's just epic. I love it. If everyone falls apart, I won't. And I have this test that I used to ask myself: how true is it that if I really do care about the approval of man or not? Now imagine you're a guy. Imagine you stand in front of 10,000 furious women that hate what you're saying. And you could think about a generic women, right? But imagine you're standing in front of 10,000 women and they're all looking at you snarling and they want to kill you. Would you still stand and speak the gospel? And if you're a woman, if there was 10,000 burly, strong, battle-hardened men, would you stand for the gospel? Or even if you were a man, would you stand in front of 10,000? Maybe you're like, I could stand in front of women. Watch yourself. But would you be able to stand in front of 10,000 battle-hardened men and say, I will not deny the cross. I will not. Kill me now. Cut my head off 10,000 times. I will not deny Jesus Christ, that you are saved through him by faith alone. How sure are you? Yeah, that's why I think Martin Luther, the German reformer, that's why I think he had such a big impact, because imagine the whole world is saying you're wrong. And he's like, yeah, but I think the whole world is wrong. It really is an echo of Jesus, because literally the whole world is saying you're wrong. And Jesus is like, no, the whole world is wrong. I know the truth. It's like, I hate to be this illustration, but you got to have more faith in the gospel than Kanye has in Kanye. I'm serious. You need that resolute conviction that nothing will ever be able to make you. I used to think, when someone would say, hey, if someone would come in, guns blazing, into our church, and they put a gun to my head and they say, deny Christ or we pull the trigger. I used to say when I was younger, I don't know what I would say when the moment comes to you. And I thought that was almost like a humble confession. And I think there is some validity to that being a humble confession, and that also maybe the opposite of saying, oh no, 100% I'm going to die. That there could be a little bit of deception, because Peter did the same thing. Apostle Peter was like, oh Lord, I will never deny you. I would rather die than deny you. And Jesus looks him in the eyes and says, you will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows twice. So sometimes we can self-deceive ourselves, but I still think that what Peter did is much better than instead of Peter saying in the moment, oh, Jesus, I don't know if I would deny. Right? Why? Because it shows where his heart and his faith is. Because I will say with undoubting conviction that if someone was to come in with guns blazing, gun to my head, I would say, I will not deny Christ. I will not deny Christ. Why? Because I will fight the good fight of faith. I'm fighting the good fight of faith right now to believe that I will say that. And it takes faith and courage to say that. And courage is faith. And it's confidence. And I'm going to talk about this more. Confidence is faith. It comes from the Latin confide, which means with faith. So when you say, oh, hey, where does that guy's confidence come from? Where does that guy's confidence in God and in the salvation and his knowing that he's going to die for the faith? Where does it come from? It's because he's walking with faith. It's because he knows his faith believes that he's not going to deny. Mm-hmm. Now, Paul continues, right? He says, I would not be a servant of Christ. So he does this, starts off with the strong rebuke, and then he says, I'm not a people pleaser. I'm a servant of Christ. And then he's almost almost transitioning now to verse 11 to saying why. Why is this? Why is he able to say this so passionately? And he's going to transition into his own testimony. Mm-hmm. He's going to say, verse 11, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that our gospel I preach to you is not of human origin. Okay? This is I don't think when you read this, I don't think you realize how insane this claim is. It is not of human origin. Okay? He's saying, I didn't start it. He's saying, I didn't start the message that I'm preaching about Jesus dying on the cross for our sins, and by faith alone, you're saved, released from the law because he suffered under the law, and now you rise to new life and you have his righteousness. It is not of human origin. It didn't come from the apostles. It didn't come, and he's saying, verse 12, he says, I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. Can you believe what Apostle Paul is claiming right now? He's saying that it wasn't Peter, James, John, Bartholomew, Matthew, Simon the Zealot. It was none of the 12 apostles taught me the message of the gospel. It wasn't when I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that I believed and understood the gospel and I got the gospel that I handed to you. He's saying, I did not receive it from any man. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. He didn't get it from anyone, okay? He's saying, my apostleship. Remember in the beginning of the earlier verses from my past message, Apostle Paul saying, my apostleship was from Christ. He was the one who ordained me. Now he speaks of the message that he got. He's saying not only was my apostleship, which he said in verse 1, was from Christ. Now he's saying my message is from God directly. No one taught it to me. You know, scholars say that Apostle Paul, by the age of, I think it was 21 or 30, he had the equivalent, 26 maybe, I can't remember. He had the equivalent of 2 PhDs. Now think about the first century as well. In the first century, there was no Google, no ChatGPT, no Perplexity, no Claude, is there any other AI, Sam? What other AIs? Whatever, any other AI. Grok, yeah, Grok. Okay, now there was none of that. There was no easily accessible knowledge. The only way that you could get knowledge in the first century was if someone verbally told you. There wasn't even a huge amount of books. You couldn't just get books like that. People didn't even have a personal copy of the scriptures or the Bible. They only had them in the temple, and they would take them out once a week and read them. Maybe once a week. I don't know. Maybe it was more than that. That's a crazy accusation. He's saying, I didn't get this from any person. Now he's saying, I was in the desert. We'll get to this. I was in the desert in Arabia, and Jesus Christ himself met me there. And I had a revelation. Okay. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2 says, Apostle Paul says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. I believe he's talking about, so here's the story of Apostle Paul, right? He's going to Damascus to persecute Christians, to imprison them and bring them back to Jerusalem. Jesus meets him on that road to Damascus, knocks him off his horse, gets blind. He goes to Ananias, he gets saved, immediately goes, preaches Jesus in the temple. But then he goes on a little hiatus. He leaves Damascus and he goes, and it could have been a couple months. And he's like, you know what? This Jesus, I want to know about this guy who knocked me off my horse, who appeared to me. I want to know about him from him directly. And I need to search him out. So he goes into the desert and he's in a tent, probably by himself, reading, praying, weeping, meditating, seeking out, fasting, saying, God, show me who you are. And he came to him. And then he goes back to Damascus, and he's in Damascus for 3 years. And he causes such an uproar and such a revival that I think it was Artaxerxes is the name of the ruler of Damascus. Here, I can tell you. I have it here. It was Ardius was guarding the city of Damascus in order to seize me, but I was let down in a basket through a wall and escaped his hands. That's what Apostle Paul says, okay? But when, yes, okay. So, Apostle Paul went back to Damascus and had this crazy revival. Now, verse 13, for you have heard of my previous way of life in Judaism, how I intensely persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. Now he's changing the tone to be very personal. You heard my story. You knew that I was a persecutor of the church of God. I tried to destroy it. Verse 14, I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my people, and I was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. There were other Jews my age, and I was leaps and bounds ahead of them when it came to Judaism. I was extremely zealous. There's that word, the Zeal House. Zealous for the traditions of my fathers. He was a faithful son, a faithful advocate to be the next generation of Jews. He was a good one, a real one. But what did he find that was so much more valuable that he wanted to give this up? What was his story? Philippians chapter 3, verse 7 through 9. In the beginning, Paul starts saying, from the beginning of Philippians chapter 3, he talks about how he was circumcised on the 8th day, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, to the law, a Pharisee, as to zeal, a persecutor, righteousness under the law, blameless. He says, blameless, not even a hint of a mistake as to righteousness under the law. Although, of course, he probably is realizing that he thought he lived with a clean conscience. There was something missing. And yet, in verse 7, he says, but whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss. As loss. That's crazy because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ, Jesus, my Lord. For his sake, I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ and be found in him. This is it. Not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ, the righteousness of God that depends on faith. If that doesn't validate the message that I have been saying here since day one, I can't find a more clear passage. I probably can in Romans, but I mean, that's like as upfront as it gets. What did Paul find so precious? Why was Jesus so important to me? I want to ask you this. If you could go to heaven and all your friends and everyone you ever wanted, and the girl or the guy you loved was there. If you were married, your wife and your kids were there, and there was no sin, no suffering. You had all the money, all the mansions, but Jesus wasn't there. Would you go? That's a real test of our faith, isn't it? I think John Piper was the one who asked this question first. But that's a crazy test of our faith. You know what that tests? It tests how precious is Jesus to you truly. How much do you actually value him? How much do you actually treasure? How well do you personally know him? How are you able to live your life without him? Now, if your answer for heaven is, 100%, no, I wouldn't want to go, or maybe you start searching something in yourself, then how are you able to live today, your life now here without him? How often do we live our life without him? Yeah. And he's saying, why? Because you're righteous when you trust in Jesus. When you stop trusting in your works. The letter of the law kills, Romans says, or Corinthians, but the Spirit gives life. Your identity under the law will always kill you. You will die if you try to become good by living by the law. Okay. You know what else is so intense about this passage here? He says, Apostle Paul says, I count them as rubbish. Okay. You know that the Greek word here, rubbish, is actually, God forbid, have mercy, is actually the closest thing that we can find, maybe one of the closest things we can find. It's feces, it's fecal matter, but it's the only time it's ever used in the New Testament. And there are some people that say it's actually one of the words that is closest to it is probably the S word. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that it's a cuss word in the Bible. I'm not saying that that's actually what it is, but I've heard multiple sources compare this word rubbish to that word, okay? Now, listen, I'm not trying to be irreverent here. What I'm trying to get you and what the goal of this is he's saying all of my good deeds and all of my righteousness was lost. It's not that, hey, it was useless. He's not saying it was useless. He was saying it was worse than useless. It was a loss. It was a negative. It went to my negative to try to live according to the law. And he's saying all of that, which I thought was this beautiful bundle of accolades and my reputation and whatever your reputation is or whatever your identity is outside of Christ, you think it's so beautiful. But he's saying once you actually get a taste of the treasure and the beauty of Jesus and the relationship with him, it will be like S. It will be like dung, like crap, okay? That's probably the PC version, okay? That's our righteousness. And I think it's Isaiah. He says this, our filthy deeds are like, our most righteous deeds are like filthy rags before God. Do you know what the uncensored, Sam, actually, do you know what the uncensored version of filthy rags actually is? I don't know if you knew this. Dirty tampons. In the original Hebrew, he's saying that our most righteous deeds are like dirty tampons. That is an outrageous verse. Now, this doesn't seem that offensive, does it? And it is at the same time offensive. And it's the point. It's to wake you up, to stir you to something. Okay? Whew. Hallelujah. That is it for today. We will continue. Verse 15. Next time. I love you all. If you enjoyed this, like, subscribe, comment. I love comments. Share it with a friend and enjoy. And check out the rest of the Galatians series. We'll post some here. I don't know where, but enjoy. Love you guys. Kudos.